And we're live! Excellent. Well, welcome to Plot Bomb for those who are watching, and for our wonderful guest, Christopher Russel. We are absolutely delighted to have you. I know we've been a lot of author chats, but I'm very excited to get to pick your brain about your method.
Awesome. It's great to be here, Allegra. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's absolutely delightful. So, first and foremost, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your book, about you.
I am Christopher Russel. I am an epic fantasy author, and the book that I just released on September 22nd is called Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. Normally I have this giant poster behind me, but instead we have a mirror today. But this is an epic fantasy with a lot of steampunk vibes to it. I have a soft magic system and a hard magic system, and I've heard a lot of people say that it's very similar to the writings of Brandon Sanderson, in that you have a group of either related to the military or something like that going on an adventure to save the world, that you are going to get perspectives from both sides, and that we are going to delve deeply into the mythology of the world while we're dealing with events in the present.
That is kind of the sort of thing that I love. I can go on and on about like deep world building and mythology. Like, give me that stuff.
And there are dragons, but they're not the primary focus in the first book, but we're going to directly meet some sentient dragons later on.
You know what I'm all about.
I do.
You know how to speak to my heartstrings. AKA, give me dragons. So, this is your debut novel, right?
Yes.
It melds, from what I understand, I've only just started it, but it melds epic fantasy with some sci-fi elements.
Yes, and so you're not going to get that with the prologue, and the caveat I always give people with the prologue is you're either going to love it or you're going to muddle through it. It's like a 70-30 split right now, because what I do differently than a lot of people do is I drop a lot of my context right up front. You are getting the inciting incident, the battle between the three Aurelian brothers that sets off events for 700 years down the line, which is when our young cadet protagonists pick up the reins of the story. And so there is a lot of fun stuff thrown at you really quickly in this battle. You have the drakes, like I mentioned. You have the Red Plague, which is this vicious epidemic that has been a real problem in the world of Lazaria that has devastated their populations. You have these mythical resources that are introduced at the end that have the capability of literally undoing the fabric of existence. So there is a lot of cool little hooks in the prologue. And so people have said, yes, I'm here for this. This is some of the best opening that I've ever read. Or there's a lot of context. I had to muddle through that to get to the main story, and then things picked up for me.
I feel like there might be something to be said about, audiences that are more into the world building of fantasy and want to get that grand scope versus audiences that want like a character to cling to and cuddle their way through the book. And
Which cuddling characters, if that's your thing, Mateo. Everybody has said that they want to give him a hug. They want to tell him that things are all right.
I also write a Mateo who is just basically a teddy bear.
It's uncanny. That's just what authors do. Let me fix my lighting.
You're good.
There we go. I'm back.
So I do have a question about like the kind of the big world building, the science fantasy, the, upfront with the world building. Was that always the plan? Like, did the world come first? Did the story come first? Like, how did that?
Okay. So that ties into your original question that I realized I went down a rabbit hole on.
You're
which
good.
Was the combination
rabbit holes are like the whole point of a conversation.
So the combination between magic and technology, and that stems from my background as an engineer. And I believe it was Arthur C. Clarke that said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And playing off of that, I decided that this was going to be a world that was moving out of the traditions of the past through an industrial revolution and into a more modern setting, and seeing what that was going to do, whether it's to their magic, to their myths, religion, their cultural and social norms and mores, all these different things. And where that comes about with the technology is they have taken the source of their magical powers. There is an innate inner magic called Manair that dwells within the blood and allows them to perform arcane miracles, as they put it. Then there is the MagTech, which is the new stuff that's come about. They've taken Elirium, which is a crystal present in this world that they used to use as a source of basically like a supercharged battery for their blood magic. And they're now using it to power electrical devices or thermal devices, or of course the steampunk. So if I really wanted to get into it and explain things, you stick it in a vat of water, you agitate it, thermodynamic processes, yada da da, all that stuff from the engineering background, which we're not going to talk about. And then you get flying airships. You get grav pads that allow them to float thousands of meters in the air. You get these supercharged cannons that can fire either shells or almost like railguns. And so that's all the cool tech stuff. And at the same time, like I said, though, you have the old type of mages that are gradually being phased out, running around with staves and swords and other forms of catalysts for their magic. So this cool anachronistic blending.
Yeah, and like that anachronistic blending, did you spend a lot of time thinking about how technology would develop differently in a world where there is magic? Like, is your actual mundane technological growth like stunted next to the magical growth? Is it moving along?
And so this is actually an interesting point in book 2, because I run, it is not really spoiler here, but I run through a lot of different stuff, primarily on the military side, that how does an unceasing, unending war drive innovation? And so all these developments are going towards the military side, and then you still see people in the lower quarter of city stuff with chimneys, that there is smoke building up on them. You have carts running through the streets, and then just a few kilometers away in the city center, you have skyscrapers. So you have the extreme poverty with all the money being funneled towards the war effort, towards innovation on these airships and artillery and Panzercraft, which are essentially tanks. But the anachronistic part here is that one of the empires that is fighting this war, they've sent all of their new technology to the front. And this one guy observes most of the airships that you see in the battles are like World War I dreadnoughts. They are metal clad. They have smokestacks. They have this effluvium of Elirium dust that comes out of their wake as they're propelling themselves along. But he, at the Capitol, way back away from the front, he sees this flying airship that's essentially like a flying wooden steamer, that it is still made of wood. And this is from 50 or 100 years ago, and they've brought it back into service because they don't have enough ships. So you get to see these different points as we jump along the tech tree.
That's very cool. Like this is one of my geeks. Both of my worlds don't have a like standard fantasy. Like in one you have a whole bunch of magical technology, and the other you have basically modern tech but with magic. So it's very cool to see like the different ways that people are now approaching like the idea of steampunk and this kind of cross genre melding of tech. And you know, we have such a exciting period of the Industrial Revolution in our own history, and we had such monumental technological growth. I think it's a fascinating thing to look at.
And like I said, when that character is exploring the city, he takes a tram run by the magical resource into an older quarter of the city, and you just see this sudden drop in tech of several centuries as soon as he gets there. And even the rail line that he's on, he hears the constant kerthunk, 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 chung, as this rail is, the tram is barely holding together. It could fly off the rails at any moment. You go from well-maintained good infrastructure to terrible infrastructure. That this advancement has had a cost to the everyday citizen that is somehow blind to how their lot in life is different from the soldiers at the front or the military-industrial complex.
It's very, like, just I love that kind of thing. So here's a question: what's the like? I have this fascination with mundane uses for magical tech. For me, it's always, you know, in one of my worlds, the refrigerator and the stove work on the same system. One pulls in energy and one releases energy. What's yours? What's your like weird little mundane tech?
I think it relates to sporting events, that they have taken their tech And they have used it to create stadiums where the shielding technology encases the field so you can get really good seats right up next to the action. And then you hope the shield doesn't fail. Otherwise, you're going to get involved in the combat that's going on. The professional game is called Flag Brawl. You have teams of 4 that play off against each other, and the goal is either to knock out all of the other team or to capture their flags. And then there's a whole bunch of different rules about who can be where and when, like soccer or football, depending on what country you're in. But I find that really interesting. And then I have projecto mics and projecto stands that are essentially it's not really aberrations, but it's a different path of what I think a radio could have been. And then you have telescribers and records, which are essentially like your camera and your TV, what puts it out. What other mundane stuff?
We do have a question from the audience.
Oh, sure.
Which is, how do you handle batteries? Like, how do you handle, is it just this magical material, or have they found other ways to store energy?
So interesting that you should mention this, and if I talk too much about this, it would go into spoiler territory, because the level of this world is such that it's heavily reliant on Elirium, this magical energy element that energy is drawn directly from. And it's a crystal, you use it, you get the Minera out of it, and eventually it decays, it breaks down, that it goes done. Again, I only read the Stormlight Archive as of a year ago, after I had already finished this book and put it out. But it's similar to the way that his spheres work, and he also uses them as currency. I don't use it as currency. But if you don't have Elirium, you're kind of sunk. You're not going to be able to power your airships and different things. So there is a very intrepid, very quirky scientist that's working on a way around this, that if somebody was to suddenly jam these crystals to prevent the flow of Minera through them, your airships would crash. None of your kit would work. So what do we do? Do you have a battery? Do you have something, capacitor, something that was even further back in tech than a battery? That we're going to have to work up this tech level, because the other cool thing about Elirium is it's clean burning. So they don't really have problems with pollution in this world. They have skipped that with their industrial revolution. But again, if you did not have your Elirium and you need to win a war, what lengths would you go to? Because these other fossil fuels still exist. It's just everyone thought they were worthless.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
So is Elirium a finite resource?
Elirium is a finite resource. It's going to break down. There is the legendary Eliriite, which if you read my back cover teaser, the inciting war was fought over Eliriite, that the 3 brothers had this, and it was an unending source of energy, and it created this almost cataclysmic conflict that nearly destroyed the world. And then after that, it was lost to the myths of time, that no one knows what happened to the Eliriite or if it even existed. Maybe it was just a ruse or a cover-up for while these people fought this great war. Yeah. When it was actually about territory or land or something else.
It's always something, and usually it's resources.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how wars go. So taking away from kind of end product, what's your writing process like? Like, do you start with your world? Do you start with your characters? How does it go from an idea to a novel?
Okay, so you asked me about this before. What was my inciting incident? So this was now 8 years ago, and I was in a second year thermodynamics class at the University of Virginia. And the professor, I should have been listening to him. He's interesting. He wasn't droning on. I just got bored. So I flipped over my thermodynamics handout, and I started doodling a map on the backside. And that map became the map for Divinity's Twilight, the map of Southern Lazaria. And so I started with all the geographic boundaries, the topography, the mountain ranges, the forests, the rivers, where people were naturally going to have settled and where civilizations would have grown up because of these elements that I think that are, what's the word I'm looking for? The anthropology of a universe is very important.
Yes.
And so I started saying this race would be here, this race would be here. These different groups would be here. Here are our political boundaries. And then my next immediate thought was villain, that I want to make this, at least the opening part of the story, I want to make the villain really cool, that they are going to be the driving force for everything that's going to occur in this. They are not going to be a cliche Dark Lord. They are going to have a purpose. There is going to be a moral gray area, and which of course a lot of authors are doing now, but that they are going to be the impetus for this world, and they're going to be a real big threat. And so that's where I started. But you were asking a writing process.
Yeah.
I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. So I'm more of a...
I wouldn't have expected that. Like, hearing you talk about your book, I would have expected like a detailed plot map and everything planned out.
That's the funny thing, is that there was a point in time at which my brain became overloaded. I kept it all in my mind until about halfway through book 1. And then I realized I just can't keep all this information anymore. Every time I have an idea, I'm pushing another idea out, which is when I started recording notes in a notebook and on my phone. And so my process for writing a chapter is I scan back through my notebook, and I typically have a section for it that that I figured that this was going to come after this chronologically. And I grab all those notes and I put it into a Word document and say, this is what I want to use in this chapter. And then as I use different things, I highlight it and cross it off. And then I go, well, if I stuff anything more in, this is going to be unwieldy, that it's going to become boring, it's going to take 40 pages, and people are going to lose interest. So then I start cutting things and throw it out. And that's how we get back to a lean chapter with all the different cool, neat ideas that I thought should be in it. But overall structure is I come up with a skeleton. I say, here are the toes, the start of the story, the knees, the pelvis, the ribs, the head, and this is the skeleton. And I go, these are my major plot points that I have to hit along the way. And then I say, characters, go do your thing. And I let the characters essentially write themselves. And the funny thing is that with that general skeleton, my characters haven't really written themselves off the skeleton yet.
You.
Yes, that they have changed different elements. For example, my biggest one is the first climax of book 1, where a character was originally supposed to have a fight against an antagonist, and he was supposed to lose because his abilities were at a disadvantage compared to this antagonist. And I decided, well, what if I expand the magic system instead here in a way that's believable, and I give him more of an emotional climax rather than a physical fighting climax? That I develop his character and also the character of the antagonist at the same time, rather than have them just exchange blows. And so because there's another fight sequence just before this, and it would just be a fight and then a fight. So I reworked it in order to do more character development there. And it also worked with the way that his character was going. He's a very noble, more concerned with others than himself. And it was thematically perfect that it go in a different direction.
Yeah, it would have been very much more normal for him, it sounds like, to do it, with blows. And yeah, it's sometimes taking a character out of their immediate comfort zone is where you get that wonderful character.
And I also love this, where we have conversations with writers trying to talk around spoilers, that there's like this second language that we use.
Yes.
This was thematically significant.
Yeah, we do speak in non-spoiler, but also I feel like once you start taking apart stories, you suddenly realize that you can dissect exactly where a story is going once you start recognizing all the pieces. And it doesn't actually make it less enjoyable. If anything, for me, I love it. I love seeing how they get there. But it's just a very, very different experience for me reading books now that I've written several.
And I'd say that most authors, and this is where a lot of writing craft is, that they understand how to start a story and they know where they want the story to end, and it's getting people from point A to point B. It's always that progress section that myself or anyone will make mistakes in, and we have to go back and revise in order to make sure your promise at the start matches your payoff at the end.
Yep. As the audience says, muses with the zoomies.
Yep.
That is kind of how it feels like to write characters sometimes. It's like, okay, no, it's hurting cats. So here's my next question. So, how has your process evolved from writing your first book? I know now you're working on your second book. Do you have more of an idea going in this time, or are you following the same kind of loose skeleton structure?
So book 2 for Divinity's Twilight is essentially finished. It is with beta readers who are trying to give me feedback in order to iron out any plot deficiencies or where characters get severely off the rails, more off the rails than they get normally.
Yeah.
And then actually, oh, that's something just ripped. What I'm actually trying to do, and this is something, a print off that I have behind my stand, I'm trying to write the standalone Asian fantasy that I'm working on that's going to be in the same universe, and I'm doing it from even more of a hybrid approach than I normally do. That all those points that I talked about that saying this needs to be in this chapter, well, I've collected it down to like 4 or 5 points, and I say, this is what is chapter 4, this is what is chapter 5. We need to hit these things. And I've reached a point because I had pretty much everything figured out through chapter 5 or 6. And so now I'm back into Pantser territory. I'm on chapter 8 now or something like that. But I generally have the outline of where the plot is going. And it seems to be working just as well. I haven't lost interest, which is something that I worried about as a pantser, that I was going to lose interest in developing the story because I already knew what was going to happen. And of course, I know how Divinity's Twilight is going to end, and I haven't lost interest with that. So it's a very good feeling to be able to have a little bit more structure than I did before.
Yeah, it's nice when you realize that you are passionate about the project, not just because you know how it's going to end, but because you want to find out all the little details along the way, and you want to go on that journey with the characters. I think it's a really wonderful feeling. So now that you are published, and you're doing the indie publishing thing, which is a lot of marketing, it's a lot of appearing on YouTube channels. And fun stuff. Has that?
Well, we're just having a conversation. I'm here to have fun.
Exactly. That's how I see it. I pretty much just use this as an excuse to hang out with my friends. So, how has the kind of pace of being an indie author and having to do all the marketing and having to do all of that changed how you write? Like, has it taken away from your time, or has it inspired you to do more?
Well, my output has actually remained about the same. And what I do is I try to do a day on and a day off with regards to marketing. And so whatever I would have written on my marketing days, if I was consistently writing every day, I've shunted to the writing day. So writing typically about 4 days a week. And my goal during that writing session is to pump out about 2,500 or 3,000 words. And so I'm still matching what I used to do, which was 11,000 to 1,500 a day. So it all balances out in the wash. But so the marketing days is, of course, social media, talking to bookstores, visiting bookstores, managing ads on BookBub or Facebook, talking to a lot of people, coming on wonderful shows like yours. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into marketing, and I even make notes for that. I make more notes about marketing than I do about books.
Oh, yes. So much more. So I know that you're working on, you said, a standalone. Do you have anything outside of the Divinity Twilight
that exists?
World that you're
nothing outside of the Divinity's Twilight yet. People can go to my website, ChristopherRussellAuthor.com, and in addition to a prologue preview, and I believe that you can also watch recordings where I've read different chapters from the opening segments of Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. There are also 2 free short stories that are set in the Divinity's Twilight universe in my free read section. And that's there's also a prologue preview for the Asian Fantasy Standalone, and for the opening to Gravitas, which is a short story in the Villain Anthology that Allegra, myself, and a few other people are putting out this December. So everybody check that out.
Yes.
But that is going to be the first published piece of work that is outside of the outside of Divinity's Twilight, even though it is going to be in my same expanded universe.
So there's the next question. Do you have any, like, I know that I have a folder of my, like, random ideas that come to me at 3 a.m. in the morning, and one day I'll do one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any of those?
I do, and I have probably 3 or 4 of them. One is a fully fleshed out idea that I am trying to become more skilled as an author before I tackle it, because it's going to require a very unique formatting and setup. Without giving too much away, I think it's going to require me to write 2 separate series that are going to be like yin and yang to each other. And they would be working simultaneously and released one then the other. Almost like a show that is giving you one person's perspective one episode and another the next. And so I just want to be closer to being the best author that I can be before I start working on that.
That's super fair. I have a couple books like that I'm just like, I know I want to write this. I can't write this yet.
And then there are the ideas that are maybe like a few paragraphs of information. And this is actually a funny story. This was a normal dream. And I was with Jay Kristoff, the Australian author who is best known, I want to say, for his, what is it? It's Nevernight is the first book in the series, but I forget what the overarching trilogy is called. Is it the Nevernight trilogy?
I'm not sure. I haven't picked them up yet, but I'm aware of them.
Okay, but for whatever reason, I was having a conversation with him at like a pub or a restaurant, and I was telling him an idea for a story. And somehow I was able to, it was almost like Inception to a degree, I was able to wake myself up, write the note down for the story idea on my phone, and then go back to sleep. So yes, there are these 3 a.m. story ideas that authors do have. And if you can wake yourself up, you can write the idea down.
I have a few of them where I cannot genuinely remember when I wrote this down. Like, I made a Google Doc and I wrote 3 sentences, and I don't know what those 3 sentences mean anymore.
Yes. So the funny thing, and I've been trying to puzzle this for the past like 3 or 4 days since I had the dream, I use specter and phantom in the same sentence, and one has to refer to something else. They are not the same thing.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Those are, in fact, that sounds exactly like the kind of idea that comes to you at 3 a.m. in the morning.
But sometimes past you is smarter than future you. That just happens.
Oh, yes. All the time. All the time. I have come across, I've read my own book, read a page, realized that I had inserted a beautiful little piece of foreshadowing symbology for something that didn't happen until like the end of the book, and I have no memory of consciously choosing to put that thing in there. It just, some form of past me knew it.
Which is actually what I did with Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. I realized that I needed to make sure my foreshadowing and my promises, either for character or plot, meshed with what I was doing later on in the book. And so the last things that I wrote in Divinity's Twilight Rebirth was the prologue, chapters 1 and chapter 2, that I went back and did those at the very end.
Yeah.
I'm not a big reviser, but I revised that.
I am a huge reviser. I kind of just word vomit onto the page for a few 100,000 words. Then just chop it up into little pieces and throw it all in a cast iron skillet. But yes, it's always fun when you kind of have to actually fulfill the promises and actually tie all those little loose ends together. I always kind of wake up with intense anxiety that I forgot to do something and I forgot to like tie a thread correctly. But
like they say, take care of it in book 2.
Exactly. It's all about just pretending like you knew what you were doing all the way through, even if you have no idea. I'm in the middle of insanity for my book 2, Where Shadows Lie. It's been a challenge.
For Heroes Right, foreshadowing does involve evil laughter.
Yes. This is my co-author for NACL. She knows exactly how much I love foreshadowing and how our series, kind of like you were saying about the yin and yang, NACL and Where Shadows Lie happen in the same universe, and we're going to be releasing them one after the other because they completely change how you read the other.
I love books like that, especially where you read the second book, and then you're reminded of Easter eggs in a previous book, and so you have to go back and read it again.
Exactly. That's the goal. That has always been the dream.
That was when I was writing Divinity's Twilight Rebirth and the entire series, that was one of my thoughts, was I wanted people to be able to catch something new on every read-through.
Every single read-through. Absolutely. I think that's the beauty of epic fantasy in particular. And, you know, science fiction too, but I think world-building heavy books in particular have that advantage of, you see these little pieces of world building and how they tie into the plot and how they tie into all those things. And it's why almost every time I read a fantasy series, I will reread the entire series once the last book comes out, because I want to see where the author laid the foundation work for all the stuff that happens at the very end.
Actually, this is a good hint, because I'm considering releasing a blog post about this. It is not entirely necessary to read my prologue for Divinity's Twilight Rebirth before jumping into chapter 1. That information, there's almost an unreliable narrator situation going on, where you are going to hear the same set of events 3 different times and told in 3 different ways. And a reader is asked to determine on their own what they think the truest form of events is. But once you hit the prologue for Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, I would suggest going back and rereading the prologue. So the epilogue ties back into the prologue.
That's excellent. I will read it in that order. Absolutely. When I actually finish it, which I will eventually, when I ever finish read.
When you have time to breathe.
Yes, breathing.
There's an oxygen tank off camera. You can't see it.
Oh, really? That would be incredibly helpful. That is usually what I'm struggling with is breathing. So, if you had a new writer right in front of you, never written a book, what would the piece of advice be?
Well, first, I always tell myself this: I don't feel comfortable giving lots of advice. That there are things that I can talk about, but I always want to put it with the caveat that I am still an initiate myself. I am still an acolyte. That I will tell you a few things, and then you should go and confirm those with a much more experienced author, or with an agent, or an editor, or somebody else. But I would say think about having a strategy for marketing before you ever hop into writing, especially if you are an indie author. That as soon as the manuscript is away, or even before that, you need to be thinking months in advance about how you are going to put this book out to the public, what your posts are going to be like. You always want to be yourself, but you still need to have a charismatic personality. That some way to tie yourself back into the book, because you are a public figure, no matter whether you have 10 followers or 10,000. You also need to be thinking about, I'd say, feedback to a certain degree, that how you are going to distance yourself from both positive and negative criticism, that you don't want to get 3 5-star reviews in a day, pat yourself on the back and say, I'm done, I've made it. Because the next day you're going to get 3 1-star reviews, whether those are legitimate or not. And so you have to be able to tune both of those out and stay centered in the middle of all the different feedback that you're going to get. All the different voices they're saying, you should have done this, or I love that you did this. And they're often, the second person, the feedback is good, but if they quickly become a fan of yours, they might be blind to whatever flaws you have in your next work. And that plays into choosing beta readers and things like that. I know that your co-author was talking about beta readers earlier, but that's often why if you look at the professional level, the Brandon Sandersons, the Joe Abercrombies, all the people on the fantasy scenes, they cycle their beta readers, that they try to get new blood in every single time, because the second time around, they're going to be more inured to the mistakes that the author makes.
Absolutely. No, that's really good advice, and advice that I wish I had followed a little bit more. Marketing is definitely not my strong suit, but it's very valid, especially for indie authors. I feel like we have challenges that traditionally published authors have professionals to deal with, and so we have to kind of become wearers of many hats.
Which was actually something I was thinking of just before I came on this show, so I'm glad you brought it up. I was thinking that the major difference between indie authors and traditionally published, well, not traditionally published, because there are indie publishing houses that handle a few dozen books. but those with the big five, is essentially the budget behind marketing, and therefore the amount of time that the author has to spend marketing. That as an indie author, you still need to have a good editor. You still need to have had beta readers and people take a look at your book. The big five author is going to have had more people weigh in on their book, but you still need to be putting out a professional product, something that's very well done, something that's formatted properly, something with great cover art, something with a great blurb that's going to draw the reader in. That you have to do all the same work, you just have to work harder to do it.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting how, despite the fact that we have to do all this work, do all this learning, which takes time, it's still, the kind of indie author mindset for a lot of the advice that is bandied around, 20 books, 50K and all of that is you should have a book out every month. I personally can't quite get to. It's not the way I write. Even though I write very, very fast, I think that, even if it takes you only a month to write a book, every single step of the next bit of process, not only do you have to do it to the standard of those big five if you want staying power, like if you want to actually produce a product that will compete in that marketplace, and then you have to do all the marketing. As you said, there's 6 months to a year of lead time on every project. It's definitely a full-time job. Like it is a commitment. And
then there's epic fantasy that for me, what I enjoy reading is big tomes. So what did I start producing? I started producing big tomes. So for me, an epic fantasy book is somewhere between 180,000 words and 220,000 words. That it's somewhere in that little average range around 200K. And for me, that's probably 6 to 7 months, and then we start doing revisions and editing and drafting. So it's going to take you close to a full year to do a cycle on a book. And then your marketing has to support that. You have to think about that differently than the person that is releasing 3 or 4 80,000 word books in a single year.
Yeah, I'm about to launch into an experiment where I've just produced a 240,000 word book and an 180,000 word book, and now I'm launching into 60,000 word books. We're going to see what happens. I am not good at writing short things. So.
Which reminds me of the Villain Anthology. I think you said that you came in close to 10,000 words?
We came in at 9,948 out of 10,000.
So before I started that is the most plotter that I have ever been. I decided there are going to be 7 scenes in this story, that this is what's going to happen in each of the scenes, and I allotted them each a specific amount of words. And the engineer and statistician in me is extremely proud. I hit enter on the final period, the final word, at 10,000, exactly 10,000. Yes.
That
was the first draft.
My co-author went in and did some revisions afterwards, and he came back to me and said, "We're over 10,000 words," and I was just like, "No, don't you tell me that. I left you with 52 words to spare. You had exactly 52 words. That's it. I'm cutting you off."
Quick, cut the adverbs.
Exactly. So on a completely different topic, I need to know about your dogs.
Oh, okay. Do I have pictures anywhere? They're outside the room. I'd have to bring them in. It would be an extreme process, but they are 4 Shetland sheepdogs, 4 Shelties. 3 are almost 2 years old. 1 is 9. The 3 younger ones are puppies. They still act like puppies. They're essentially a gang. They run around. They roughhouse. They tussle with each other. They bark at other dogs. They are pretty antisocial to anyone outside of their little clique they've established. But they are all named after characters from Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. Valen, who is my personal dog. The others are my parents, and so Valen sees them relatively often. We went home and visited, and we're actually still there because of the coronavirus, and I'm teaching a class back at my university virtually during the coronavirus because of the new regulations that they have. Everyone has to be 6 feet apart, no classes over 60, but I digress. Valen is the protagonist. He is a 65-pound blue mural Sheltie. Has this cheeky grin, bounds around, prances, ears flopping everywhere, tail wagging. And he has a love-hate relationship with Mateo, who is also a character in the book. Mateo has a very cheery disposition, but he can also be very timid, just like in the book. And Valen, just like in the book, bullies Mateo occasionally, because Valen thinks he deserves all of my attention. And when I give Mateo attention, Valen comes up and starts snarling. So just like in the book.
So, real question: which came first, the character traits or the dog? Like,
character traits. So the book was already done when we got the Shelties a year and a half ago. And then the third one is Mira, aka Celeste, because Celeste is one of the main characters in the book. Mira is the 5-year-old daughter of one of the very reader insert antagonists on the opposite side. Very relatable guy. But the reason we didn't do Celeste is because if you wake up at 5 a.m. and you go out on the back porch and you start yelling Celeste in a loud voice when you're tired and your voice starts slurring, it very quickly becomes a different word, S-L-U-T.
Yep. Yes, it does.
Have to pronounce that first syllable very hard.
Very hard.
Celeste.
So yes. Going back to publishing, I had to ask about the dogs. I have a golden retriever. I live in a herd of dogs as well. So going back to indie publishing, why did you decide to indie publish instead of traditionally publish? Did you try? Did you query? Or did you go straight to indie?
So I am much more informed than I was then. I was naive at the time. So I opened up. Tor is the publishing house under which is it? Penguin, Macmillan.
I can't remember which, but it's Tor.
But they're the fantasy. They're the people that put out fantasy and sci-fi books. They have Brandon Sanderson, Robert Jordan posthumously, all those other big names. And I looked at their submission guidelines. It said stick your your first 33 chapters or 10,000 words into a manila envelope. Give us a 1-page cover letter. Give us a 10-page synopsis of the book and where you want to take this series. And then, like I said, put it all in a manila envelope, send it to our publishing house, wait 6 months, and we'll give you a yes or no. And I was extremely intimidated by that. It makes sense to me looking back now, considering the volume of input and requests that they get for review. But at the time I went, I don't want to wait 6 months. That's in half a year. My life will have moved on by then. I need something more immediate. And at the same time, I happened to consult with a friend of a friend who said that they knew somebody that worked with a small publishing house, with Morgan James Publishing, who I'm now with. And I went and sat down and had lunch with their CEO, who happened to live in the area. We hit it off. He really liked it. And they became my imprint for Divinity's Twilight. And that's the story behind that. So I went with the first readily available option that I thought was feasible before doing all my research. And it has worked out for me. I am happy with where I am at. I don't know if I would have done it differently on a second time around, but I think that on one of my future books, just to see whether I can do it, maybe with the standalone, I might try doing the query process just to see what happens.
Yeah. I just went straight to indie as well. I just did not have the time and energy to put into querying and waiting forever. So
then there's a lot of etiquette because Brandon Sanderson's agent recently started doing submissions. So I went, okay, let's go and see what his process is. Well, he asked you to go and read like 320 blog posts on this one other person's site, so you don't make any of the mistakes in those 320 blog posts in your 1-page query letter. So once you've done all that, you have to do the 1-page query. Then you have to send it to somebody else to make sure that it passes gumption with them, passes, I'll just use salt since we're into salt, passes, I'm missing the colloquialism. Passes mustard, there we go, passes the mustard. But then you can send it to him, and then it enters a queue, and then he passes or fails it. And so there is an extremely long, intimidating process to it. And then there's also an etiquette to querying, that you're not supposed to send out more than 1 or 2 at a time for that 3 to 6 month cycle, because if one of them accepts it, they don't want to be competing with other people. They want to be able to have first right of refusal.
Yep. It's a process. I honestly think that, obviously there's benefits to being traditionally published, but in I really love the indie life. Like
Mhm.
I do. I'm okay without living with all those.
Mhm.
all
I'd
those
say that the only disadvantage to indie publishing is the stigma from the beginning of the indie publishing boom. But
Yes.
that is starting to fade away. The people that were only reading traditional books have started to read indie books as well. And that's because there's more ebooks, there's more audiobooks. So if you produce a good ebook or a good audiobook, you're probably going to reach a subsection of that market and you're going to be able to expand. There are a lot more opportunities for you today to break out from the press, the mass.
Yes, and there is still, of course, a mass for anyone, looking to indie publish and asking, is my book good enough? Yes, it is. Still try to make it better, but like, there is still a mass. So, question. Speaking of that mass, what do you have any like pet peeve tropes or things in fantasy and science fiction that you just can't stand or really love?
I don't think that there's anything that instantly throws me off. Wait. Oh, I said the word instantly. Insta-love. There we go. Never minded. Yes. So two characters instantly falling in love, which some people have said that one of my characters falls into the danger. There is no straight up romance in Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. There is foreshadowing for seeds of future romance. And there is a character that very quickly gets it into his head because of the suspension bridge effect, that he is in love with another character, that he likes them. Of course, then the suspension bridge effect makes him think he likes like two other characters at the same time. So it is not true insta-love in that regard.
Yeah, it's infatuation, momentary infatuation, which is different than insta-love that actually gets carried out through the story. I share that.
Like if we're in the middle of a very dangerous sequence where we're running for our lives, we are not going to stop and have a romantic chat. We are going to wait for a point in time at which there is a lull, at which we're not being shot at. That's another horrible thing along with the insta-love.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are about to die, it is time perhaps to say, actually, yes, I've loved you all along, but not time to like have a long conversation about your relationship.
Every time that happens in an action movie, I'm waiting for them to get shot while they're kissing.
Right? No. It has like for me to buy it, they have to be like still actively looking at the shooter and while not making eye contact, just like spill it out so they don't get dead.
It's an intimidation factor. Maintain eye contact.
Yes, absolutely. So, other than you're working on you're done with the sequel. You're working on this Asian fantasy. Is there anything else that you're working on?
Not really. I tend to write a short story every now and again, like a palate cleanser, and those are typically in the Divinity's Twilight universe. So there are 4 short stories in the Divinity's Twilight universe. I've made 2 of them available on my website because they don't mess with the book 1 timeline, and the other 2 mess with the book 1 and book 2 timeline. So you would get spoilers for book 1 if you were to read those other 2. And one of them actually sort of hints at what's behind the curtain, so that might be even a book 3 thing. But I've also written the epilogue/prologue to book 2, book 3. And I think that that's sort of a combination piece, that both of them are going to be from the same character's perspective. And that's why I want to be able to split that. There's the Asian fantasy that I mentioned, and we talked about hard magic system, harsh climate, magic system based on the rules of thermodynamics. So we're bringing everything full circle back to that lecture where I started Divinity's Twilight and was goofing off.
Gotta love it.
But aside from that, the Villain Anthology, that short story is going to be set in the world. There is the potential to expand that world because that is the 3rd world that I've created in this universe.
Very cool. Well, that's all the questions that I had prepared. And, while we're wrapping up here, if anyone in the audience has any questions, we'd be delighted to, get to them. But in the meantime, Chris, would you like to tell us where to find you, how to support you?
Sure, and I'll do a quick little shout out because I was giving these away at a signing yesterday, and you can also get them through my website. How far back do I have to be?
Perfect.
These are posters that I've just got in from a concept artist of mine, Celeste Francis, Colorado, out in Well, actually, I just said where she is. She's in Colorado. But she used to do children's illustrations and graphic design, and she has just moved into oil paintings, and she does a fantastic job bringing different parts of Divinity's Twilight to life. This is Lilith, one of the group of military cadet protagonists. We also have an example of the technology from the world. This is one of the airships, and you can see that it has sort of more of a futuristic design.
It does. Again, I love the wings.
Yes, the swept wings, the graceful beak. I use a lot of bird imagery to describe different airships. And one of the cool things that I use to convey world building and character elements, because the nations to me are almost like characters, is their airship design. The Dalmatians have very elegant, graceful airships like this one. And the Sarkonians are all hard lines and angles. And if you could put a gun there, you do it. They're a utilitarian. And then the Raban Imperium, they have a very extreme sense of honor. And so they paint their warships in very garish colors so they can never hide. That their airships will always be visible from anywhere on a battlefield.
I love that. Mm-hmm. That is such a beautiful, it says so much about that culture.
This is Ritter Marshal Ogre Valeskar. He uses magnetism magic, and you can actually see the spools of coil on his belt snaking out as he's moving around and doing martial arts. That he's able to move his armor, cables, rapiers, all these different things independently, and that makes him one of the most dangerous people alive. And then, of course, we get into like the one horror element that I add, and this is from the prologue. You might have already read this. This is the pyrovans, the combination of magic and Terran, basically human corpses, Elirium, and coal. And there's fire gushing from the seams. They're in grotesque, twisted positions. And the people that were used to make this, the corpses, are actually sort of in agony and torment, that you can see them taking these horrible, wicked expressions. So those are the 4 pieces of concept art that we've done. And those are available through my website, ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. I'm including one copy of one poster free and a bookmark free with every signed copy of the book. So here are the bookmarks. So you get those as well. And right now, through October 11th, the special on those signed editions is $10.95. That is this good trade paperback. You can see all the different things. Nice matte finish on the front. There's the teaser on the back. And then the other places you can find me on social media, you'll be able to access all of those from the website. But those are Christopher_Russell_author. That is Instagram. My Twitter is Chris_DT_author. Starting to see a theme with the branding. My Facebook is Divinity's Twilight Fantasy Novel, so that breaks it a little bit. But you'll be able to find information about the book on all of these. The next thing I will have up is lots of different pictures from the signing that we had yesterday, which was a great event. We sold 33 books, and there's just a lot of love for the series right now.
That's wonderful. I always love hearing, indie love going around. It's so heartening to see people I watched promote their book, and it's actually moving, and people are reading it, and people are loving it, and there's so much joy in the indie author scene.
Well, I'm waiting to see NaCl take off. It's a great premise. I love the blurb.
Thank you very much, and I am very excited to actually get into the meat of Divinity's Twilight. I know that I'll probably speed through as soon as the prologue is over, because I like paying attention to the world building stuff, so I always go very slowly during world building heavy sections. But I'm that person who stays up until 7 a.m. in the morning reading once a book catches me, so you'll probably hear me at again, get a message from me at 7 a.m. Damn you!
Why did you kill this person?
Why? Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Allegra. This has been so much fun.
And I am sure that we will be talking soon.
Absolutely. Another one of those late night author chats.